based on.
Let's do that. All right. Just a second for people to trickle in.
Based on her intro, I'll decide.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're gonna repeat everything. She reads all your prompts.
I defer to you. I'm in good hands here.
Mm.
I know I am.
All right. Welcome to Powerhouse Arena's virtual events, everyone. My name is Megan, and tonight we're very pleased to be hosting the launch of Love Lockdown by Elizabeth Greenwood. This should be in conversation with Benjamin Lorr. You can buy copies of the book at powerhousebookstores.com. The link is in the event page where you registered, and I am also posting it in the chat right now. That way you can grab a signed copy. If you have any questions, you can use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen at any time, and we'll get to those at the end of the event. No worries, you don't have to hold them until the very end. Type in whatever you want. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for the evening now. First, we have Benjamin Lorr, the author of Hellbent, a critically acclaimed exploration of the Bikram yoga community that first detailed patterns of abuse and sexual misconduct by Guru Bikram Chaudhuri and the secret life of groceries, seen right there, called A Titanic Achievement of Reportage, Insight, Humor, and Humanity about the American Supermarket. Lorr is a graduate of Montgomery County, Maryland Public Schools and Columbia University. He lives in New York City. And we have Elizabeth Greenwood, who is the author of Love Lockdown, Dating, Sex, and Marriage in America's Prisons, and Playing Dead, A Journey Through the World of Death, Fraud. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Vice, O, the Oprah Magazine, Longreads, GQ, and others. Welcome.
Yeah.
And without that out of the way, I turn the floor over to Ben.
All right, Liz, I'm super duper excited to talk to you about this book.
Same here, friend.
It is a triumph of reporting, is an amazing accomplishment, and I want to get in and ask you all sorts of questions. Before I do, I wanted to give a little bit of my sense of the book, just for people who haven't read it. I got lucky and got to read the advanced copy, so we can do this. But like I said, Love Lockdown is an amazing book. It's a tour de force of reportage, investigatory, but it's a lot more than that. It's almost a meditation on love. It tells the story of 5 couples who met and fell in love. Well, at least one of them was in prison, and it's a real range from a former diplomat who was pulling down $250,000 a year to people who were involved in the prison system since age 10. And, you know, someone who's married to a convicted murderer. And between these portraits of the couples, you weave in interviews with psychiatrists, priests, guards, everyone in this met-well incarcerated ecosystem. And it becomes an investigation into the power of love and what love means in a carcel state, and what it means in just about any state. And in that way, it's a very American book, because America is a world leader in having people in prisons.
We're number one, unfortunately.
Number one in the world, and number one in our own history.
That's
in
right.
terms of and so, like, it's this book that, like, has incredible range. There's heartbreak on every page, from the advice that someone gives when you're talking to your loved one in prison. You have to hold a picture of them next to you when you're talking on the phone, to lots of humor, like draw or like dick pics through like sketching the dick for your beloved, and like really unforgettable characters like Joe, who's like the centerpiece, this Iraqi war vet who makes the seemingly dubious decision to get married to a man who is charged with attempted murder of his ex-girlfriend, but yet in your rendering comes off as a total powerhouse of a woman, you know, not just sensible, but competent. And, you know, you let all these contradictions live together in these characters. And I truly don't know how you pull it off, which is why I'm really excited to talk to you about it. But first, do you want to give us a little taste and read from it?
Sure, I will read just from the very beginning, the introduction. So this needs no introduction. It is the introduction. So here we go. The bride wears black. An atmosphere of momentous occasion permeates room 315 at the Roadway Inn, nestled between two highways outside Salem, Oregon. It's the morning of the wedding. Mary Kay Cosmetics, Snackwell's popcorn, errant shoes, and water bottles are strewn across the room where the bride awoke at 4 this morning, ready for her day. She spent some quiet moments of the morning outside, smoking, watching the sun come up over the highway, feeling the presence of her grandparents looking down upon her. But now Journey, or Jo, as she's known to friends, is a ball of nervous energy, pacing in bare feet, losing and being reunited with her cigarettes, phone in hand, overwhelmed by the messages of love and blessings coming through every few minutes. Friends have sent a bouquet to commemorate her nuptials, which the bride receives in grateful hysterics, so much so that Lisa, who has flown in from Missouri to attend to all the bridal details, like forcing Jo to eat a slice of buttered toast and running out to buy a forgotten razor blade at the gas station across the street, has to redo her eye makeup. Lisa is then tasked with fashioning an updo free of bobby pins, as they'd surely send the metal detectors howling. Afterward, Jo practices walking in her high heels up and down the carpeted hallway. She's brought 2 backup outfits in case the guards deem her black sheath too form-fitting or the color too close to navy blue, the shade worn by inmates and therefore forbidden to visitors. Her wedding band, which she'd selected and bought herself, fits the prison specifications. No gold, no embellishments. Today, Jo will marry Benny Reed, who is serving a 10-year sentence for attempting to murder his then girlfriend. Their wedding will take place at the maximum security Oregon State Penitentiary, and the visiting room decorated in white and pink streamers and paper wedding bells strung up by the prisoners themselves. Their wedding cake will be powdered donuts, and they will toast each other with blue Powerade from the vending machine. It will be the 3rd time they have seen each other face to face. It will be the 1st time they've ever gotten to sit next to each other.
Awesome. I'm so glad you read that, because it really gives a flavor for why the book is incredible. It just has this, I mean, all of your writing has this range of being able to move from like extremely concrete details to humor and then back to rawness. And I feel like that passage does justice to the whole book. It captures a lot of that range. It's like the best of nonfiction, where you're really brought to a place and a moment and a mood, and like you feel the anxiety in Jo. So I want to ask you some questions, both about things that just struck me when I was reading the book, and like how you actually did this as a writer. So you start off the book with what it's not, and you say, this is not about people who knew each other in the outside world. This is not about children and families with one member on the outside. This is about people who found love with someone they did not know before prison. Okay, how does that work? Like, how does it happen? How do couples meet? How does their love blossom? It's
great question. So the thing I heard again and again in interviewing people who were one half of this couple, usually the person on the outside, a lot of people said the same thing over and over again, which was that they were not looking for something necessarily. But somehow, a conflation of circumstances led them to log on to the Penpal website, to volunteer for the prison ministry, to meet in all these kinds of ways that, prisons do facilitate bringing the outside world in. So the people I wrote about, it was mainly via Penpal communication. That's how Jo and Benny met. And that's how another couple I write about, Sheila and Joe, met, both through prison ministries that they were involved with in their church. Another couple, Crystal and Fernando, that I write about, Crystal saw Fernando's father on the news proclaiming his son's innocence and wrote him a letter when he was at Rikers Island. He was not even convicted yet. He was awaiting trial in jail at that point. So there's this really interesting tension between the real deliberateness you have to meet someone in prison. You're not just going to meet them out at the supermarket. You have to, apply pen to paper and put on a stamp and all these different steps that go into it. But also this kind of divinely ordained, almost like the universe pushing them in this direction. And, much to their surprise, meeting the love of their lives.
Yeah. And I guess it is so different than like a meet cute in the outside world. I guess, like, what are some of the things they're up against in this system? I mean, and one of the things that I think you do really well is that the prison becomes this like sixth character. Like there's the 5 couples, and then there's this prison, which is like an entity in itself. And you learn, so someone who thought they knew a lot about what prison life was like just from reading news, like I learned so much about what it means to be locked up, just through the details you threw in. So like, what are they up against in terms of the institution?
Yeah, quite a lot, quite a bit. So in terms of communication, letter writing in prison is kind of evergreen. You can all, the US postal system, that's always going to work. That's always going to get to someone in prison. Sometimes the time that can take can span weeks. Even in my own reporting, I would send people letters that they would not receive for weeks, sometimes months. That's one aspect. There are other, as we move into the 21st century and find ways to profit off telecommunications in prisons, there are a bunch of different companies that provide, apps for messaging, whether it's via text messaging or emailing with someone in prison. But those are not free. Those cost money and they can be exorbitantly priced. So finances are another big challenge. There's also this inherent power imbalance because as far as phone calls go, only the person in prison can call the person on the outside, and they can only do that at certain times of day. In the federal system, they get an allotted number of minutes if they have the minutes remaining. In the different state systems, it's if anyone can afford to put money on the phones, these are collect calls. And then, you can't call up the prison and say, I'd like to speak to inmate number, 9741. Like they can only call you. So that's just in communications alone, that's some of the challenges that they're up against. And then in terms of, just like time and space, being able to visit, Joe and Benny, for example, lived on opposite sides of the country when they met. She was living in Maryland at the time. He was in Oregon. So, most of their relationship, the time they got to spend in person was very limited. She would get to go out there maybe twice a year. She has kids and it's extremely expensive, right? Travel across the country, book travel, hotel, all those things. And then, you're getting to know your boyfriend, fiance, husband under the watchful eye of guards, cameras, and a dozen other couples in the room. So, and these are just the challenges we're talking about, like getting to know someone, let alone the real humanitarian and health and safety challenges people in prison face every day.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And I kind of want to go back to what you were talking about, like Benny and Joe on opposite side of the country and that lack of availability. Like, I was struck by, like, that sounds like an intense negative at first. You're like dating someone who's definitionally unavailable, unable to engage in the relationship on like very fundamental levels. But the more you wrote about it, there's just a lot more to that dynamic. So I guess I want to ask you just about like how the availability of the couple like operates in prison. You talked a lot about like the role of fantasy and projection on people. And then there's like one quote in there, you said, these couples did not find love in spite of prison, they found it in the midst of it. And I guess I'm just like, want more. Like what?
Yeah, I think that is definitely the first kind of assumption we make, is that this is someone who is unavailable if they're in prison. And in a lot of ways they are physically unavailable for, the vast majority of the calendar year, shall we say. But what I came to discover and learn from interviewing these couples is that when you kind of excise the opportunity to be together physically, especially, when it comes to physical intimacy. And when you are shut out, by virtue of necessity, the rest of the world, when you're just communicating with someone, whether it's on that phone call, in that visit, or sitting down to write that letter at night, you're not on your phone and you're not, looking at Netflix at the same time. There's this real concentrated focus and this real intimacy that comes when you have this container that prison, for better or worse, provides.
Yeah.
So in that sense, a lot of people described a true vulnerability that they had to be in order to make these relationships work. So it's a very emotional availability that, comes perhaps at the expense of the physical availability. And then the piece about finding love, not in spite of prison, but in the midst of it, I think what I mean there in part is that these relationships took on their own unique and particular shape because of those strictures, like because of prison. People were able to, they had to be very innovative in the way that they expressed physical intimacy. They had to be very innovative in the way they found to bring each other into their lives. I think of one incredible prison wife, Regina, who I met, who would send her husband Manuel, pictures every week of just what her family did throughout the week. Nothing special, not like prom photos, but this is us sitting down to dinner. Here we are at the game. Here we are, after church, whatever it was. So, there's this incredible creativity that, this very unique situation inspires.
Yeah. And I love the idea of like that heightened sense, especially around like the narratives in love, like that it really allows people to write, like every relationship is a love story that you're telling about the other couple. And in some way that I didn't really get how much that was present in my relationships until reading about people who had to like construct that. And it's like one of my favorite lines in the whole book. You say, it's easy to behold the prison wife and say she's delusional, but all relationships are acts of delusion. And there's something just like beautiful about like how much these women had to construct their relationships with their significant other, and how prison like holds that for them in the creativity.
Yeah, and in some ways, if you think about it, they're less delusional than our relationships out in the world. You have this person's rap sheet, you can just Google it, like if only you could do that for someone you met on the apps, right? Like, what are your crimes and misdemeanors? Right. I'm being flip, of course, but there is something, a bit more upfront about it. But I think that, to embark upon any relationship, you never quite know what you're signing up for. And you never know how it's going to turn out. You don't know what life is going to throw your way. So I think another thing that I came to find incredibly inspiring about these relationships is that because of, some people's sentences, whether that sentence they're confronting is a few years, a life sentence, 20 years, you have to take things one day at a time, no matter what. That is the only way, for the person in prison, for the person on the outside, that you can digest, kind of what's going on, especially when that time seems so long, when the context, when the environment is so scary. But that's the way any relationship happens. Is one day at a time. And I think in any relationship, you have to ask yourself, well, am I happy today? Do I want to be with this person today? And if the answer is yes, onward,
You get another day.
You get another day.
All right. I love that also the idea, the point you were saying about how like the constraints of prison foster all this creativity, and like all the easy tricks that we use to like to get through a relationship aren't available. You can't just Netflix and chill. You gotta like draw out the Netflix frame. But I guess that brings me to what you say is the most asked and most invasive question that the outside partner gets. So I feel a little bad, but I'm asking this on behalf of all our pervy, curious pervy viewers. But what about physical love? Like, what about sex? Like, how does that blossom, or how does that work or not
Sure.
work?
So I think that, most people's first thought is like conjugal visits, right? That's a thing. Well, not really. In this country, what we call conjugal visits, which is really a misnomer, it's really family visits in the sense that this is a visit that is private in the sense that it takes place usually over the course of a weekend on prison property, usually in a kind of trailer or bungalow. Those are for immediate family. So not only spouses, but parents, kids, sisters, brothers. And those types of visits exist in only 4 states in the United States right now, and they do not exist in every facility in those states. So the opportunity to, have that kind of privacy for intimacy for the vast, vast majority of prison couples in this country is impossible. It doesn't exist. So what do you do?
Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it was so interesting. Again, like lots of creativity, I think that, again, like as someone I interviewed said, sorry, let me back up a little bit. One thing that I found that was so striking that I heard come up again in these interviews is people saying, oh, my husband or my boyfriend and I, we read the 5 love languages, that Gary Chapman book that was like on Oprah in the 90s, I thought that was so funny. You have these gentlemen in prison reading the 5 love languages, but like this was really a touchstone for a lot of couples. So, we don't have conjugal visits or anything like that. So how do we figure out what we like? So for a lot of people, that was a real starting point. So if the love language was physical intimacy, which, of course, that brings up challenges, right? For people who had in-person visits, I would hear these descriptions of holding someone's hand that was like 50 Shades of Grey. Like you wouldn't believe it. Like it just is so charged. So any kind of physical intimacy like that comes to take on really potent, powerful meaning. People exchange pictures. Often those pictures, everything's covered generally. But those pictures are getting looked at by guards. All mail that comes in is screened. So that was a stumbling block for many couples. They say, I don't want the person I'm going to see on Saturday, like walking through the metal detector, seeing me in that way, right? So, I mean, you talk about vulnerability here. Like this is hugely vulnerable to put yourself out there. There
was a wonderful / funny / heartbreaking moment where the woman is talking about giving phone sex to her partner, and she like thanks, or she
says you're welcome for what you're about to hear, because the phone calls are screened too. Exactly, the phone calls are listened in by guards,
and it's just like, oh my god, like you're just, I mean, that's a lot.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Fascinating. Well, I guess I kind of want to get into like how you did this as a writer, because it is, as someone who tries to do something similar, I found myself reading this in literal awe of like how difficult a book this is to write, from all the obstacles in terms of like your subject matters are behind bars. Developing a relationship with them is really hard. Getting the level of detail that you did, even in that intro scene, hard. Then like there's all these power differentials between you and them. So are they going to actually be able to give you feedback on what you're writing? Like so many layers of difficulty for this book. So I guess like, what is the logistics of reporting and people from prison in this type of nonfiction? I mean, you're not a New York Times beat reporter who's just going into prison and like asking a few questions and then filing your article. These are people you spent months, years with. So how does prison affect that?
It's tough. It's different. It's really different. Gosh, there's so much to that question. I mean, in terms of logistics, I had kind of 2 sides of the same coin. I had the outside partner, and then I had the person in prison. So, with the outside partner, I will say prison wives, to make a gross generalization, are very savvy, like on the social media and the texting and stuff. So they were like I was like able to talk to them, with great frequency and a very lovely ease. So that part was very available to me. That was balanced out, of course, by their counterparts, their better halves, who were in prison, with the difficulty of that piece. So, if there was a person who was in a facility that had something like JPay, which is again one of these email applications, I could very readily send them questions and they could respond that way. So sometimes it would take place over a kind of email. Letters, which I actually came to really prefer because I love seeing the people's handwriting. I love like the way the paper smell. I feel like, and people I found who've been in prison, who have maybe for the first time in their lives had time and space to write and think about their story and process it, are such beautiful writers and so thoughtful and so funny. So, I have like a filing cabinets full of these letters that I've saved and I cherish them. And they mean so much to me. So letters, but again, as I said before, that could take a very long time, like weeks sometimes. So that was challenging in itself. And then, going in to visit people, I can't in the normal way I would in any other time, even if I'm on a phone interview, record in the same way or have pen and paper out. So it was really, committing to memory. And then like, as soon as I got out of those doors, like furiously scribbling down everything that happened. And then, in terms of this power differential you bring up that I thought about constantly, that kept me up at night, that I think is one of the richest and most interesting questions of any nonfiction, specifically in this kind of nonfiction, I guess, where it's so pronounced. I did show early drafts to everyone in the book and everyone who's in prison. Mostly I wanted to make sure that I got it right. I don't want to be out here writing things that are wrong about prison, about their stories, about what life is like in prison. So that was for me a way to just, make sure that was good and to kind of bring, hopefully, I hope, balance a little bit of that, bring that back into balance.
Which is easier said than done. I just want to say, for people who aren't writers,
it's scary. It's the scariest part of all of it. I swear.
Very scary. Nobody really loves their portrayal necessarily. It's always through your eyes, and so
it's scary.
You're sharing something with somebody.
I want to tell a funny story about that, actually. So one of the couples I write about in the book, Sherry and Damone, Damone at the time was still incarcerated. And for various reasons you can read about in the book, I didn't want to send that chapter through the mail. So I read it over the phone to him in 15-minute increments, which the prison call allowed. And like, probably for me, one of the best moments in all of this was hearing him say at the end of that chapter, "My name is Moan Bone," because that's his nickname, "and I approve this message." It was the best.
Oh man, we need Moan Bone to approve this conversation.
Totally.
Okay.
Moan Bone's rad.
Another fucking forgettable character in a book full of them. I guess this leads into the question of just like, again, this is maybe like an inside baseball kind of thing, but like, I think a lot of people don't know, when you start writing on a nonfiction book, you sell a proposal and you write that proposal to sell because you're trying to get an advance so you can afford to write the rest of the book. And then you actually have to deliver the thing, and then like changes over the course of the actual doing. So I guess I'm just curious, like, what was this book like how did you first conceive it, and how did it change over time?
Yeah. So I think, like maybe a lot of us thinking about this world, I kind of had this idea that prison wives were this kind of distinct, discrete subculture unto themselves. And that I would be able to, put on my knapsack and like go into the world of prison wives, and report it out for 6 months and come back and write it and say what that was like. I think of a great book by Bill Buford, Among the Thugs, the soccer hooligans, different subjects altogether. But, I don't know. I kind of had it in my mind like that this was something I could like hitch my wagon to, and then just, observe and and write. No, it was not that at all. I think I was originally contracted the book was 2 years, and it took 5 years to like today, but it was double the time. It was 4 years till I turned it in a first draft. And the reason for that is because, not in street subculture, who knew, right? This is a very diverse and huge, wide range of people and experiences. And when I saw that diversity, I wanted to reflect that in the couples I chose to write about. So I knew I wanted to reflect that diversity in the type of charges that someone was convicted for and the length of sentence someone was serving. I wanted to make sure I had, couples in there where the partner had been released from prison and came home, because that's a big question I had. What happens when you don't have this container of prison anymore? How does that shake out? So finding the right people to talk to took a long time, and gosh, I mean, for the 5 couples in here, I probably have double, triple that many people that I spoke to and interviewed at length that did not go into the book for various reasons, so there's so much on the cutting room floor in any nonfiction book, always, that doesn't make it in. And that's not just writing, that's like hours and hours
of research.
And that's reporting trips that don't go into it. That's like flights and all these things that we'll never see the light of day, but it makes us better people for having done it. So it took a long time. And then of course, what I realized, like the key thing that I realized on the fly doing this is, if I'm going to write about relationships, things need to happen in these relationships, and things happen in real time. So I had to give it the time it deserved. And, as time kind of ticked on and I saw that, Benny was going to be getting out of prison, sooner than later at that point, after I'd been in this for a few years, I said, I wanted to see that whole piece through. I wanted to see what that was like, meeting them from, excuse me, their wedding day to Ben's release date, and what that experience was like. So it changed, it morphed. And then, I also really wanted to incorporate the purview of certain academics, activists, other people who are in this world and have great information about it. So that takes a minute as well.
Yeah, which all praise to patient editors.
Yes, exactly.
To give the time.
Thank you. Thank you enough.
Because it really does reflect that time. The characters have arcs, like Betty and Joe go on a journey and you go along with them. And that just takes time and patience. And
but also, I mean, it's amazing for them to tolerate me hanging around them for 5 years, I don't think any of the couples, when they said, sure, we'll be interviewed for your little book, that is going to be like, cut to 5 years later, and I'm still asking you about your sex life with someone in prison. Like, it's a huge commitment on the subject's parts too, that is just like the greatest act of generosity, I think.
It is. And it's crazy too. It's just like that cliched image of the iceberg, but it's like, that's what makes it a fast-paced read, is the fact that there's this like submerged, buried, patiently reported, like gargantuan mass that you could draw on to take like the gems off of that, and then as readers we get the benefit from that. But it's good to know that was all down there, and you just didn't luck into like the story of these amazing stories. It was like patiently. A lot
of it is luck, though. Sometimes I feel that way. Like when I first started talking to Jo, for example, she just so happened to be getting married the next month. So, I mean, that seems like the greatest strike of luck and timing, too. So there is also, I don't know, a special kind of little magic that happens sometimes, too. It makes it really feel right.
Totally. You need it all. And you need this space for that magic to come. I guess my last question is just, this is a whole book about love and relationships. And I really made me reflect on my own relationships quite a bit. But I'm just curious, like, what are you taking away from this in terms of like, what do you learn about love from this book?
I learned so much about love from this book. One of the really interesting things I saw again and again was how this love that started in prison came to transcend prison, not only for the couple, but often for, particularly the woman on the outside in her personal life. And many of the people I wrote about did not have any connection to prison prior to becoming involved with their partner. So this whole world was completely new to them. So as a result, they didn't really know what they were doing, and they often felt, stigmatized by friends and family who were like, "Girl, what are you doing? Like, why?" So they would kind of find their ways, these online communities that form to help people navigate these systems and figure out, a lot of people have the same questions, like, am I really doing this? From the kind of logistics to what do you need to bring to a visit, and how does this all work, right? So from this thing that started, from a romantic relationship, these women find each other and they make the most incredible friendships and support systems. And from this kind of act of standing up for themselves, for what they need and what they want, that increases their self-esteem in these manifold ways, to the point where they're, going back to school and starting businesses and doing things they didn't think they could do. So I found that really inspiring, and that, a relationship kind of when it's at its best is more than just two people. It's a community, and it's friends, and it's, helping you be your best possible self. And that's what I saw a lot. And, so to go from like prison pen pal to, best possible, like, self-actualization, like that happened. And it was amazing to watch. And another thing I think that I thought about very, very much, just in a practical day-to-day level, is just how lucky and fortunate one is to be able to be annoyed by their partner up close and personal, to be able to, like, the little things that piss you off, like, the dirty socks on the floor, or, Scott, your best friend, my husband, cannot close a drawer or a cabinet to save his life. These are tricky things. But anyway, I mean, I just came to see that and, kind of be like, okay, well, that's a beautiful thing, and in its own way. A lot of people don't have that. So just to not take for granted what it means to be able to share space with someone and to be in your day-to-day lives, that just became so precious to me, and still is. And, a lot of people don't get that. So what we take for granted is really just like this huge privilege and gift in a lot of ways.
Yeah. A fittingly beautiful, and to note, a talk on a very, very beautiful book.
Thank you. Great questions.
You made it easy. and maybe we have some questions from people out there.
Sure.
I think there are some actually in the Q&A. And I know how we have to.
I know, do we click?
You have to click. Anonymous. How long? There you go.
Here we go.
I'll let you read these.
Okay, so we have one question. How long did this take interviewing, research, and writing to execute? And was Elizabeth nervous about going into a prison for the first time? Great question. Thank you. So yeah, from beginning to end, soup to nuts, 5 years, like 5 years from 5.5 years, I guess, from like the book proposal to today. And, one is people I talk to, prison wives who've been doing this for years, they say every time you hear those doors close behind you once you're going to visiting, it's scary. Like you're in prison, you're going through a metal detector. So, I always felt nervous. You feel nervous if you're going to get in, if they're going to let you in, if you did something wrong. It was not my first time going into prison. I'd done reporting from prisons for my first book, Playing Dead. And I have several friends from childhood who have been in prison or are in prison. So it wasn't my first time, but you always know where you are when you're going to a prison.
So then we have, how much did trauma from the prison system play a role in these relationships?
Oh, it's a great question. I actually just wrote a piece about this that you can find on The Atlantic pretty soon. But trauma, wow. I mean, it's such a huge, huge topic. You can't be in any kind of carceral system, whether it's, even like as a kid being in juvenile detention to being out on probation, parole, it is traumatizing. It is designed to be traumatizing. And, many, many studies and literature reviews have shown that people who enter prison are usually entering already with a great deal of trauma, whether that's from disruption in their early lives, addiction, various kinds of, systemic racism, poverty, abuse, you name it. Like, this is a highly traumatized population, and you could not design a more perfect environment to trigger that trauma every single second than prison. So trauma is huge. And, when people get out and come home, they come home with PTSD. There's a discrete subtype of PTSD called post-incarceration syndrome, that means anything from kind of mirroring, being unable to shake the habits of prison, whether that's the kind of schedule, waking in the middle of the night because that's when you got up for your meal, habits like washing your underwear in the shower, this kind of emotional shutting off, like wearing the mask to not recognize holidays, birthdays, because that was too troubling. So these were things that were all adaptive in prison. When you come out, they're maladaptive. And the system, as it stands, unless you have access to some great nonprofits that do work with people who are, the reentry process, you get zero support, even like zero mention of that this is something to expect in a lot of cases. So a lot of people are really thrown for a loop and taken aback and don't know what to do, because for the kind of the day of homecoming is something they look forward to so much, but then there's this whole other set of challenges to face. So trauma is huge. And the thing I'm writing about right now, which I think is so interesting, is that I think that people who are tangentially connected to the system, namely prison wives, because that's what I looked at in this book, they experience their own form of post-incarceration syndrome after their person comes out, their own kind of form of PTSD from being in the system as well. So yeah, trauma is huge. And I just hope there should be many, many more resources for people to access to deal with some of that trauma.
Awesome. Did you ever second guess the decisions you saw of some of these women you were profiling?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And of course, I have my friends and my family, and I second guess their decisions of what they're making in the relationships. I don't know, maybe I'm just like a judgy person or something, but like, you see sometimes, you can see in others perhaps more easily what you can see in yourselves, like the kind of patterns, right? We all have a friend where you're like, why are you dating the same kind of guy? But that was a real tension in the book when, especially sometimes, people talking about their past attitudes, especially when it came toward domestic violence, specifically having to do with violent partner violence. That would be really hard. And that's something I really grappled with. I grapple with it in the book. But my place as a writer and as a thinker is not to cast judgment. It's really to just try to understand and try to make sense of, what seems not entirely coherent to us at face value. But, there's always a reason. Like, relationships contain your entire history, it tells relationships, I think, tell like the whole story. So, there's always much, much more to it than what you kind of see on the surface.
Yeah, I imagine.
Excuse me.
All right, next question, a wonderful name. When reporting into these relationships, how mature, like real, did they seem to you? Did it feel idealistic, like a kind of teenager love, or pretty solid?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, hello. I saw the whole gamut. I mean, I think that I saw a lot of, one of the ways that I kind of accessed My understanding of this world and a lot of the people I interviewed was through social media and was through people's like Facebook profiles, Instagram profiles. And there's, definitely like a contingency of people who are in it, like kind of for, I think, what they consider like the life glamorous and all that. And that's for sure a thing, but those weren't the people I chose to really spend the time with, like getting to know the why of it all. I mean, I did speak with some of those people. And I did speak with, people who kind of wrote letters to serial killers and all those things. I wanted to understand that too. But I think, to commit like a chapter to someone, it has to be, a pretty mature relationship or like, desire to have a relationship. So I kind of tried to do a little bit of both, but yeah, when I really committed, it was people who were like thinking about these things. And that was another like way I chose who I wrote about. Everyone I ended up writing about was so incredibly reflective and so thoughtful about all of this. I would sometimes frame a question like, okay, I'm going to ask you something kind of delicate and you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable. And they'd be like, oh yeah, I've thought about that 1,000 times. So there was nothing I could say that they hadn't thought of and grappled with already themselves.
Yeah. And I guess one thing I took away from the book was just how much idealism and kind of like teenage kind of love coexists within something that's solid.
Yes.
And how those are really all love is made up of both of those strands, and prison to some extent it teases them out, so they're both like more exaggerated.
Like if you think about wedding vows, what could be more teenage and idealistic than that? Like till death do us part, like that's Romeo and Juliet. Like who says that? I mean, I think that like, yes, I think what you're saying is that idealism, it helps propel a relationship to function on a lot of levels.
Yeah. Do you want to, so we kind of touched on this, but talking about dealing with the third person in the mix, the Department of Corrections, how did getting visiting clearances, COs who read the mail impact your writing?
Yeah.
So what did that have to do with your, did it restrain some of your writing?
Yeah, well, there were some things like particularly PREA, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, which I write about in the book, which is a piece of legislation designed to curtail prison rape. Yay, that's good, but it has incredibly broad language that's used to penalize LGBTQ prisoners. That was something I was very conscious of writing about, in my correspondence back and forth with people, knowing that would be read. I always let the incarcerated person take the lead on what we would talk about. So they have a better sense, no matter what, of what's going to get them in trouble. So that's one way I navigated that. But yeah, I mean, you're on a prison phone call, you hear every 5 minutes, this is a call from a correctional facility. So you're always aware. But the things that, I think that they were really screened for in terms of, hearing about codes for drugs, gang activity, violence, that wasn't really, I wasn't planning any prison breaks. So that didn't, that was good.
Sequel for the Hollywood adaptation.
Oh my God.
Well, and then we have, how did you decide what to say in your opening Penpal messages? Yeah, like hooking these people to participate with you. What was it like waiting maybe weeks for those initial responses?
Oh, what a great question, Christopher Bax. So yeah, I mean, I always just kind of had like a general spiel. Like, for example, one of the ways I found the couple who's incarcerated that I write about, Sherry and Damone, I had one of the big Penpal newsletters. It's actually a physical hard copy newsletter that goes out to people in prison. I asked them to just post a query saying that, I'm an author and I'm looking for incarcerated LGBTQ couples to interview for this book. And so it had my address on it. And I'll tell you, the mail I got from that query, like lots of mail, very little to do with, what the question I had asked. So that was really interesting, definitely. But, I think that I got the first letter from Damone, who I ended up writing about, had to have been months months and months after I posted that. The good thing is that I wasn't like waiting for the mail carrier every day, because I had so many other kind of like couples and people I was checking in with. So time would kind of pass and would notice. And then when I got this letter, I'll never forget, he titled his letter "A Dream Come True." I said, this is what we've been waiting for. So yeah, there's just a lot going on at all times, I guess, how to answer that question.
All right. How do the women who fell in love with prisoners deal with or make sense of the imprisoned partner's guilt if they believed the person was guilty? I mean, in terms of developing trust and other ways we judge people's characters when we wouldn't get to know them or fall in love with them. Great question.
Great question, Bill Goldstein. Leave it to you to ask the good ones. That's a great question. And that was a huge piece of all of these relationships. And, what I heard again and again is, I'm not marrying this person's past, I'm marrying who they are today. Now, how you get there, that's a process. There are people I wrote about, namely these couples who had, violent charges. Sometimes those crimes were way more in the past rear view, as they were for Sheila and Joe, who I write about. He'd already been in for 15 years at that point. And he was, it was very clear through his actions, his participation in restorative justice work, everything he did, that he had grappled with that crime and, paid for it. There are people who their crimes were a bit closer in the rear view. And how do you make sense of that? So I think it was a lot of, soul searching. Joe in the book, she goes back and forth saying all the time, like, some days I'm the happiest woman in the world. Some days I think I am crazy. Like, what am I doing? So, it was always moving a lot of times, but I think that, what ended up happening and, continues to happen, is these relationships are still going on or not in some cases, is that, the proof is in the pudding, and, it takes time to build that trust, like it does in any relationship. And sometimes, you can't hide who you are, for a very long time, right? So people come to know, and then it's the question of deciding, what are you willing to live with? What are you willing to tolerate? Which is a very personal question. So yeah, it's complicated.
Super complicated. And I would be remiss to say, if I didn't feel like these are stories that people are telling about the stories of their love. And when you were telling the stories in the book, I thought you did a really good job of juggling the details of their criminality and the fact that sometimes we're dealing with people who have done horrible things, and yet they're also the centerpiece of this profile of a love story. And you managed to hold up both parts of them for us as readers in a way that I think that's a really tricky thing to do. You don't want to turn people off. You don't want to minimize the fact that you're dealing with actual crimes.
Right.
And so, yeah, kudos to you. And
Thank you.
I think we've run out of questions in our Q&A, and we're also basically run out of time for this. But if there's any last ones.
One. Francis Dodds. What a good question. You can tell this is a writer and an editor and a thinker asking this kind of question. Francis's question is there a moment in the book you are most proud of? Like, if Oprah happened to flip the book open to one page, what would it be? Oh my gosh, Francis, what an amazing question. I had to think about it for a minute, but I think, I am part of that intro I read, I'm not gonna lie, like that was fun to write. But I think that toward the end, I come to some, I don't want to say conclusions, but I have some thoughts about what it all means and what it means for, us out here who might not have a person in prison that they're writing to. I think kind of what the stakes and consequences are for a society that incarcerates 2.3 million of its citizens. I'm pretty proud of that. And I think that, again, as we talked about, kind of thinking about what it means to be in a relationship the prison part just kind of throws it into this funhouse mirror and distorts something that we all do, which is we make promises to people when we are ourselves changing and shifting, day to day, moment to moment, year to year. So how do you make a relationship work in these changing, bodies and that we are and minds? So I'm proud of that part. I think, if Oprah is looking for something to read, she might like it too.
She better check it out. And I think that's our last question. The book is Love Lockdown.
And there's
Dating,
another
Sex,
book too.
Marriage in America's Prisons. It is a triumph, and you should pick it up immediately because honestly, we didn't scratch the surface of the characters. We didn't scratch the surface of the details of the prison state. Like there's like 1,000, there's 5 years worth of research in this book, and we probably touched about 30 minutes worth.
But I have to shout out Ben's book too, The Secret Life of Groceries. This is one of those nonfiction books that's like the best of the classic New Yorker, where you open this up and you're like, twine, what am I going to read 5,000 words about twine about? I didn't know there was all this to know. Like if you've just eaten food in your life ever, this is a book you need to read. You talk about the characters, unforgettable, so
All
funny.
right, I'm cutting you
so
off on this.
erudite. I love this book.
I'm cutting you off, but if Oprah should read my twine paragraph, that'd be great. All right, y'all. Liz, this was super
fun. Thank you so much, Ben.
Yes.
You're my dream interlocutor.
My dream is to let you speak and give you a platform. So
thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks, Powerhouse Arena.
Bye.
And thank you so much, Benjamin, Elizabeth, and everybody who asked such really amazing questions. If you missed any part of this event for any reason at all, don't worry. It's going to be up on our YouTube channel soon, and those links will go up on our website, all that fun stuff. And please, if you haven't already, buy a copy of the book. They will be signed. Yay. The link is in the chat again, and you can also get the link on the event page. And every book helps us keep putting on fun free events like these. Thank you guys, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. So fun. Thank you so
Megan.
much.
Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye. Thanks a lot.